Hello all, my name is Annika Osten and this is my Spring 2021 EcoStudio final presentation. So I interned for Orange County Solid Waste Management, specifically in their recycling division. My mentor was Kira Laveau, she's their Education and Outreach Coordinator, and I worked on their apartment bag recycling program. So this program was designed to improve recycling volume and contaminant levels for apartment complexes where the recycling isn't one bin per unit, but rather a collection of bins that all the units go to. So the way we did this was by a sort of information campaign. Essentially, we distributed bags to each door that had information about what can and cannot be recycled on English on one side and Spanish on the other side. And we also hung signs at every recycling site at each of these complexes. The sign, an example of one, is in this image on the right over here. That details what can and can't be put into the bin. So the first thing I had to do was reach out to apartment complex managers to see if they were interested in participating in this program. It was at no cost to them whatsoever, but we still had to make sure that they wanted it before we could distribute the bags. We began with a list of complexes that were specifically poor performing and had a lot of issues with contaminants to the point where sometimes their recycling couldn't be picked up. Unfortunately, those complexes also had a pretty distinct lack of interest, and I only ended up getting one of those to sign on to our project. Luckily, though, that was the largest complex out of the 14 that we did in this cycle. The other 13 of the 14 apartment complexes came from a more general search of apartment complexes in Orange County. The next step was to start the site evaluation process. For this, I recorded the volume of recycling and the amount and type of contaminants. The point of this is so that I will then go back after the bags have been with residents for about 2 weeks and record this data again so that they can be compared and I can determine if the program was effective or not. This can also be compared with data from the previous cycle to see if anything went differently or if changes should be made. I definitely learned a lot about policy at this stage as I tried to dig a little bit deeper into why certain contaminants kept showing up repeatedly. As it would turn out, there's a huge amount of inconsistencies. There's a lot of county to county inconsistencies. For example, what I can recycle in Wake County is not necessarily the same as what I can recycle in Orange County. There's also location inconsistencies. I can recycle cardboard at my single family home, but if I were to go visit a friend in an apartment complex, I would have to find a separate cardboard dumpster. And then there's a lot of things that people just don't know. For example, the county doesn't tell people not to recycle black plastic even though it can't be recycled, because in the past what's happened is that it's caused so much chaos with people saying, well, for example, what about these different shades of gray? That some people will end up just giving up, chucking stuff in the recycling bin and assuming that we'll figure it out later. There's also some inconsistencies with who picks up your recycling. Depending on who picks it up, you may or may not be able to recycle number one, PET plastic, because some facilities can handle that and some facilities can't. On the right are two sort of shaky examples that I found. On the top right is paperboard, which is recyclable, but with a shiny exterior, which is not, so that counts as a contaminant. On the bottom right is a plastic tub that was not number one or number five plastic, but it counted as a tub, which does make it recyclable. So what's going on at the moment is distribution, which is largely wrapped up, all but one or two of the complexes that wanted to distribute the bags themselves and had a little bit of trouble getting started, have their bags out, and I'm working with those last two complexes to get them out as soon as possible. I'm also starting post-bag evaluations, which is essentially the same sort of site evaluation for volume, amount, and type of contaminants as before, and this will be the data that we can then compare with what the recycling looked like before the bags were distributed to see what the changes are. Next is the report. I'm essentially writing a report for the county detailing what happened and what the results were and what that means for the future. The county is trying to, well, my mentor is trying to get about $30,000 from the county budget to continue and expand this program. So ideally, I will be able to conclude that it is successful so that they can then continue on with this. Lastly, I will be discussing the limitations in the report, and I wanted to bring them up really quickly. Essentially, this is an imperfect program, as everything is. I was pulled aside at some places and told that there's a large presence of people who speak neither English nor Spanish. so the bags may not be the most effective way to reach people at some complexes. One, for example, has a very large Southeast Asian population whose first language won't be Spanish or English, as they're mostly recent immigrants. There's also the issue of at some complexes, people at neighboring complexes will come in and drop off their recycling, and those people won't have had the bags. Hopefully the sign will have an effect, but it will be difficult to determine in some cases the effect the bags have had if it looks like there's a lot of cross-contamination from other complexes. So I tried to incorporate most of my takeaways throughout the presentation. Here's just a quick review. So the number one would be communication skills. I had to communicate quite often with apartment complex managers to determine interest, to work out how bags were going to be distributed when and where, etc. The second would be the report writing. My mentor has promised me detailed feedback on my report, and so I stand a lot to learn there as I don't have a lot of experience writing reports in this context. The third is site evaluation experience. So again, this isn't something I've done before, and so now I've been able to do this and worked hard on making sure that between my pre and post bag evaluations, the way I'm collecting data and the way I'm treating each of the contaminants is very consistent, and that it's also consistent with the way it was done previously in the first cycle of the apartment bag program, so that the two can be accurately compared. And lastly, I feel like I gained a lot of experience in a digital work environment. I have never done anything like this over Zoom before, and it was definitely a different experience, but I feel like I can now navigate communicating everything digitally over email, Zoom, etc. That is all. Thank you for listening.